Have you ever wondered if the AI you're talking to might actually be experiencing something? With ChatGPT and other advanced AI systems becoming increasingly sophisticated, scientists and philosophers are now seriously debating whether these systems might already possess some form of consciousness. In this video, I'm going to break down the latest thinking on artificial consciousness, from functionalist views to biological requirements. And you're going to be shocked to learn how close we might actually be to creating, or having already created, machines that actually experience the world. I'm Evan Goldstein. I'm a licensed professional engineer and a data scientist. I'm building AI Capitalist to talk to the leaders and the thinkers, like you, about navigating this new world of thinking machines. Now, in today's episode, I'm going to start by talking about the philosophical debate surrounding artificial consciousness. Then we'll see what various thinkers have argued about whether machines could ever have genuine conscious experiences. And then we're going to move on to talk about different perspectives on consciousness itself, from functionalist views that focus on patterns and processes to biological views that emphasize the importance of living tissue between your ears. Throughout the episode, we're going to explore this fundamental question. Could a computer or robot ever truly feel pain, experience emotions, or have an inner mental life like humans do? We're going to look especially at Ludwig Wittgenstein, who was an influential Austrian-British philosopher who lived from 1889 to 1951. Wittgenstein made major contributions to logic, philosophy of language, and philosophy of mind. He argued that many philosophical problems arise from misunderstandings of how language works. In this context, we're going to explore his view that it might be impossible, not just practically but conceptually, for any human-made machine to have genuine conscious experiences. Now, this gets to a fundamental question. Could a computer or robot ever truly feel pain, experience emotions, or have an inner mental life like humans do? There's been a ton of talk over the years about all sorts of ideas, like what's possible, what's impossible, what's a must-have, and so on, when it comes to the soul, to minds, and now to consciousness. Now, the German philosopher Dieter Birnbacher, who specializes in ethics and philosophy of mind, examined this topic thoroughly in his paper called Artificial Consciousness. In this work, which was published in the early 2000s, Birnbacher traces the historical pattern of philosophers and scientists who have claimed that machines could never possess consciousness. His research reveals that skepticism about machine consciousness has deep roots in Western thought. Birnbacher approaches this debate from an analytical perspective by carefully examining the logical foundations of art and arguments, both for and against the possibility of artificial consciousness. Julian Huxley, who's a famous British evolutionary biologist who lived from 1887 to 1975, responded to some of these ideas about machine consciousness in a BBC television program. The show's host that machines might eventually develop forms of consciousness. But his opponent, Julian Huxley, strongly disagreed, and this reaction represents what most scientists believed at the time. Huxley insisted that emotions, real intentions, and genuine thoughts, and true understanding could only happen in living biological matter, never in machines made of metal and silicon. Now, this same basic view was also expressed by Paul Ziff, who was an American artist and philosopher back in the 1950s. Ziff stated very confidently that only living creatures, not machines, can truly have feelings. These perspectives reflect a widespread belief that consciousness is uniquely tied to biological life forms. Now, going back to the 1950s might seem a little strange, because the technology that we're seeing now has only just come out. But a lot of the mathematics and the concepts behind it were actually developed in the 1950s. We just didn't have the computing power to actually run our models and our systems and actually start to see how intelligence seems to emerge from these large language models. So is it really true that intentions, thoughts, and understanding only happen in living things because they're the ones that can do it? So if that's the case, then that argument falls flat. Remember when only humans could ace complex math problems? Now computers can do that too. So who's to say the same won't happen with intentions and thoughts? And what about Paul Ziff's take on why only living creatures can actually have feelings? Maybe he was just going with his gut or some intuitive feeling there. There's not a lot of evidence to back that up yet. On top of that, doesn't all of this sound kind of self-centered? Are we thinking from a human or a living being perspective, which blocks our ability to see alternatives? Some people might say that artificial consciousness doesn't stand a chance, especially if they think things like quantum activity at the microtubule level is where consciousness comes from. Microtubules are these structures that were discovered in the brain and that might have some quantum effects in the sort of realm of physics in the very small. But then again, isn't it possible that it's really just the functional and the structural aspects of brains, like the abstract ideas, rather than just the biology, that are what really matter in this conversation? Dieter Birnbacher thought of it like this. Imagine if what creates consciousness isn't about the specific physical materials our brains are made of, like proteins and cells, but instead it's about how those materials are organized and function together as a system. If that's true, then it would be strangely coincidental, like winning the cosmic lottery, that consciousness only emerges from the exact biological materials found in human brains. Why couldn't consciousness emerge from different materials that are organized in similar ways? Or even that are organized differently that operate similarly, like computing systems? This argument suggests that if consciousness comes from pattern and function, rather than the physical substance itself, then consciousness might possibly emerge in systems made of different materials, like computers with the right organization and functions. What's so unusual about cosmic accidents? So we're saying that this is a cosmic accident. Now, for some time, there was a search for intelligent life going on. We still have SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. But we seem to be encountering what's called the Fermi paradox. And with all the galaxies and all the stars that we've searched for signals from, and we've looked in every direction for evidence from, we see no evidence of intelligent life from elsewhere. And this has led to what's called the rare earth hypothesis, the idea that actually intelligence or even life may not arise often. And this has led to the rare earth hypothesis. This is the idea that complicated life may require very specific conditions that are found on Earth but are very rare in the universe. So this could also apply to intelligence. As we're saying, we're taking an anthropocentric view. We're viewing humanity as the center of everything, as the golden standard of intelligence. And then we're saying, how does this intelligence arise in humans? Why can't it arise elsewhere? But it may be that biologically, there are just certain conditions of human evolution or human creation that were very unique to the human situation that caused this intelligence to arise. In other words, it was just a cosmic accident that intelligence arose on this tiny speck of dust floating around in this Milky Way galaxy. So what's so unusual about cosmic accidents? They actually do happen constantly throughout the universe. In fact, they have to happen all the time. It's part of how reality works. These chance events that shape our universe are similar to what Nobel Prize-winning physicist Muriel Gell-Mann called frozen accidents. Gell-Mann, who lived from 1929 to 2019, discovered the fundamental particles called quarks. And he used this term to describe random events that have permanent and far-reaching consequences. In his view, many aspects of reality, from the specific laws of physics to the evolution of life, may result from chance events that became frozen into the structure of our world. Once these accidents happen, they permanently shape everything that follows. So it's strange that philosophers and scientists often view cosmic accidents with suspicion when discussing consciousness. Why should consciousness be exempt from the role of chance that shapes everything else in our universe? And if you're enjoying this episode, I would appreciate it if you would push the like button. Pressing like helps this content spread to others, and it lets me know that I'm making what you want to see, so press like. I think this is all interesting because all of the people I've referenced, except for Chalmers, come from a time before we had artificial intelligence. The physicist Paul Davies, who directs the Beyond Research Center at Arizona State University, has written extensively on the intersection of science and philosophy, and he has a particular view about cosmic accidents. In 2007, he wrote for the New York Times an opinion piece about taking science on faith, and he argues that when it comes to the fundamental laws of nature, we shouldn't just accept them as random or arbitrary occurrences. He believes that these laws need what he calls a deep explanation, a fundamental reason for why they exist in the form that they do. Davies is suggesting that without such an explanation, the universe becomes something absurd, a place where meaningless chaos somehow produces the precise mathematical order we observe. In his view, both religious explanations, which God created the laws, and the standard scientific explanations, that the laws just exist without reason, are unsatisfying because they require a kind of faith. Davies challenges scientists to develop explanations for physical laws that come from within the universe itself, rather than appealing to external forces or simply accepting them as unexplainable accidents. Sean Carroll, who's a theoretical physicist at Caltech and the author of several books including Something Deeply Hidden, offers a contrasting perspective to Davies, who's made significant contributions to cosmology, general relativity, and quantum mechanics since the early 2000s, argues that we shouldn't expect there to be some profound explanation for why the laws of physics are the way they are. In his response to Davies, Carroll suggests that our human tendency to ask why questions about everything stems from how we think about everyday objects and events that exist within the larger explanatory frameworks. However, when it comes to the fundamental laws of the universe, Carroll maintains that there's no larger framework to appeal to. The universe just is what it is. He points out that demanding the universe makes sense to us or provide us with deeper meaning might satisfy our psychological needs, but it isn't necessarily a scientific requirement. In Carroll's view, there's no reason why there has to be a deep explanation for the basic laws of reality. They may just exist as brute facts. And accepting this possibility is part of a scientific approach, rather than imposing our human desire for ultimate meaning onto the cosmos. Now, Davies' argument is about something more fundamental than our debate about consciousness and biology. He's questioning the very laws of physics themselves. Let's put that aside for a moment. What we're really asking is more straightforward. Is consciousness something that can only exist in brain cells? Here's the thing. Scientists are much more likely to figure out how consciousness works than they are to explain why the universe's basic laws exist. It's entirely possible that consciousness really is tied specifically to the physical material found in our brains, the neurons, synapses, and networks that make up our biological minds. Think of it like a recipe. Maybe consciousness requires this exact biological recipe and nothing else will work. It's possible that the special arrangement of cells in our brains is the only way consciousness can emerge. I want to point back to a period called the cognitive revolution. So I want to take a second to point back to the Toba catastrophe theory. Now, this event is believed to have occurred around 70,000 to 75,000 years ago when the human population was reduced to as few as 3,000 to 10,000 people. In other words, humanity almost went extinct. The theory suggests that the massive eruption of the Toba supervolcano in Indonesia triggered a volcanic winter that led to severe environmental changes that drastically reduced the human population. This population bottleneck created what evolutionary biologists call a genetic bottleneck, which is a sharp reduction in genetic diversity. Following this period, humans who survived showed evidence of increased behavioral complexity, including more sophisticated tools and artwork and symbolic thinking. Well, this period coincides with what anthropologists call the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, or sometimes the creative explosion. And there's a marked increase in the sophistication of human culture and technology. Some researchers also connect this to the emergence of fully modern human cognition. But the exact timing and causes of human cognitive evolution are complex and still debated. But the relationship between this population bottleneck and cognitive development isn't necessarily causal. There could be other factors. However, one thing that's been noticed about this revolution is that the physiology of people didn't change at all. The brain size, shape, contours in pre-Toba catastrophe humans were the same as in post-Toba catastrophe humans. But somehow you start to see creative use of tools and new ideas, artwork suddenly flourishing. So there was some sort of internal restructuring of the brain and how the brain functions that had nothing to do with the size or overall structure. So does this imply that consciousness can't be found in silicon chips or in any other material, but only in the specific biological structures found in living brains? Or couldn't the specific arrangement of brain parts that creates consciousness itself be a lucky accident? After all, when we talk about the patterns and functions of our brains, rather than the exact biological materials, we're talking about something that could theoretically be copied. This is where Birnbacher makes an interesting point. He suggests that there's no obvious reason why a brain made of silicon couldn't potentially develop consciousness just like our carbon-based brains. When you think about it logically, there's no bulletproof argument against a silicon computer brain becoming conscious. But then again, there's also no bulletproof argument that it would definitely become conscious. So this is where things get tricky. If we focus only on copying the patterns and structures of the brain and ignoring the actual biological materials, are we missing something important? People who support the function is everything view claim that what we're leaving out doesn't matter. But how can we be sure what matters until we've considered everything that we're not including? It's like saying that you could build a perfect working car using plastic instead of metal just because you've copied the design. Maybe the materials actually do matter in ways that we don't yet understand. Perhaps the function of the brain and its physical materials are more deeply connected than we realize. So is downplaying the whole material substrate requirement? Lately, it seems like functionalists have been the majority when it comes to this debate. But there have always been some philosophers who really emphasize those material elements. For example, back in 2020, a survey showed that functionalism was the most popular theory, with about 33% of people either backing it or leaning towards it, and dualism came in second with 22%. So this tension between form and substance has historical roots going back to medieval philosophy. Moses Maimonides was the influential 12th century Jewish philosopher, addressed a similar question to this guide to the perplexed. While Maimonides couldn't have imagined computers, he wrestled with what constitutes the essence of humanity. He proposed that human intellect represents a qualitatively distinct form of cognition, one that connects to divine intelligence. According to Maimonides, the human mind isn't merely an arrangement of matter, it participates in something transcendent. Following his reasoning, a truly conscious machine would need more than just the right arrangement of parts. It would need to somehow participate in this special form of intellect that bridges the material and the divine realms. And this perspective challenges modern functionalism because it suggests that consciousness might refer to something beyond physical structure, regardless of whether it's made of neurons or silicon. The philosopher David Chalmers has spent a tremendous amount of time considering the possibility of philosophical zombies. In his view, merely conceiving of a zombie is enough to render it possible. And the story continues. If they're plausible, then physicalism is false. Chalmers' philosophical zombies aren't the shuffling, brain-eating variety from horror films. They're hypothetical beings, physically identical to conscious humans in every way. Same brain state, same behaviors, same verbal inference about feeling pain or seeing red, but lacking any subjective inner experiences whatsoever. There's nothing it's like to be a zombie. The conceivability argument that Chalmers develops works roughly like this. If we can coherently imagine such beings without contradiction, which is step one, called conceivability, then they must be possible in some meaningful sense, which is step two, possibility. And if zombies are possible, then consciousness cannot be explained purely in physical terms. By definition, zombies have all the physical properties, but lack consciousness. Now, I just have to step in here as an engineer, not a philosopher, and say that I'm not necessarily buying into this. If I imagine a purple elephant with green wings, that doesn't mean that there are purple elephants with green wings, or that there could ever be purple elephants with green wings. But Dieter Birnbacher notes something similar when discussing the conceivability of conscious objects, like stones or computers. Points out that, strictly speaking, we can't declare these ideas unthinkable. We can imagine them without obvious contradiction. This emphasis on conceivability has led some philosophers, which would include Chalmers himself, toward panpsychism, which is the view that consciousness might be a fundamental feature of reality present in some form throughout the physical world. Panpsychism is really a step, I would say, backwards in human thinking, and that we move from the divine monotheistic back towards a sort of animist spirituality where there's some sort of spirit in all objects. But there's a reason to question whether what we cannot conceive of actually matters in this debate. Just because some people can imagine conscious computers doesn't prove that they are possible. Our human conceptual abilities may not be reliable guides to metaphysical possibility in complex domains. This is really bringing up a critical weakness in conceivability arguments. They depend on the assumption that human imagination provides reliable access to metaphysical possibility, when our conceptual frameworks may be limited by our specific evolutionary and cultural history. Now, in my own sense, in my own personal learning in divinity, it's well understood in monotheistic circles that there are realms of intelligence and understanding that are impenetrable to us. These are called the sod in Hebrew. One unrelated idea, let's think of an interesting philosophical argument. Some philosophers think that if we created something physically identical to a human in every way, down to the last neuron and chemical process, then that creation must have consciousness just like we do. In other words, if the physical brain creates consciousness in humans, the exact physical copy should also be conscious. This is raising an important question about the word must in that statement. What exactly is the word must doing in here? In philosophy, words like must, can, and possibly are called modal terms. They describe what is necessary, possible, or impossible. But some philosophers wonder if saying something must be conscious is actually adding any real meaning to it at all. Think of it like this. When we say snow is white is true, the phrase is true doesn't really add any information beyond simply saying snow is white. This idea comes from what philosophers call the redundancy theory of truth. The redundancy theory suggests that calling something true is just repeating what's already been said. So back to consciousness. Is saying a perfect physical copy of a human must be conscious any different from just saying it is conscious? It's like arguing that when you arrange your matchsticks in a square shape, you must have a square. Couldn't we just say when you arrange 4 matchsticks that way, you have a square? And this may seem like wordplay, which a lot of philosophy is wordplay and hair splitting, but it does highlight how difficult it is to talk precisely about consciousness and whether it could exist in non-human forms. The language we use shapes how we think about these deep questions. Let's also consider how Wittgenstein viewed the possibility of computer consciousness, but in a very different way. Wittgenstein himself never called the idea of computer consciousness a conceptual absurdity. This is the term that Birnbacher used to describe Wittgenstein's position. By conceptual absurdity, that would mean the idea that doesn't just seem unlikely or impossible in practice, but one that doesn't even make logical sense within our framework of understanding. It's if someone asked you to imagine a square circle. The problem isn't just that it would be vertical. The very concept contradicts itself. According to this interpretation of Wittgenstein, the idea of a conscious computer might be similarly contradictory at a fundamental level. Now, Birnbacher comes back and he explains that throughout Wittgenstein's later work, he suggests something quite strong. The idea of a computer with feelings or awareness isn't just unlikely, it's fundamentally nonsensical. Wittgenstein didn't think that we needed to seriously consider this as a real possibility. In Wittgenstein's own words, we can only meaningfully say something has sensations, can see, is blind, can hear, is deaf, or is conscious or unconscious when we're talking about a living human being or something that is very much like a living human being. Our entire concept of consciousness is built around human experience. The words that we use to talk about awareness, feelings, and sensations are defined by and rooted in human life. According to him, applying these concepts to machines is wrong. It's using language in a way that doesn't make proper sense. Think of it like trying to describe a computer as hungry or homesick. These terms come from human experience. While we may use them metaphorically for machines, my phone is hungry for power, Wittgenstein would say that we're stretching language beyond its meaningful use when we seriously suggest that machines could have these experiences. This isn't just saying that machines can't be conscious, it's saying that the very idea of machine consciousness misunderstands what consciousness means in the first place. This shows that Wittgenstein's behaviorist approach and his focus on what he called language games. What does that mean? Wittgenstein wasn't primarily interested in whether machines could actually be conscious in some deep metaphysical sense. He was just concerned with how we use language when talking about consciousness. The question wasn't, can computers really feel things? Rather, does it make sense within our human language to say computers feel things? He believed that language gets its meaning from how we use it in different contexts or games, shared rules that we follow when communicating. Wittgenstein basically set aside the big metaphysical questions about consciousness and what it actually is. He didn't care much about the physical details of brains versus computers. Instead, he zoomed in on how our language about consciousness works and whether it can meaningfully apply to machines. The interesting thing is that Wittgenstein acknowledged that artificial beings could act like humans. And today, that's exactly what we see: robots and AI systems that can mimic human behavior very convincingly. Modern AI can simulate conversations, recognize emotions, and it can respond in ways that seem remarkably human. Wittgenstein questioned whether we can meaningfully talk about machine consciousness, but he left open the possibility that machines could behave in ways that strongly resemble conscious humans. And as technology advances, this resemblance becomes more and more striking. Bernbacher questions what Wittgenstein really means here by saying, what kind of can is this? Why can we say this only of a living human being? This is an important challenge because Wittgenstein claimed that we simply cannot imagine or truly conceive of a conscious machine. But is that actually true? A lot of people today have no trouble imagining conscious robots or AI. Science fiction has been doing it for decades. And this raises a bigger question: why should it matter whether people can imagine something or not? Isn't this getting back to a sort of anthropocentric, a human-centered view? Throughout history, humans couldn't imagine all sorts of things that later became reality. People once couldn't imagine flying machines or the internet, instant global communication, but here we are with airplanes and smartphones. Now, Wittgenstein's real argument seems to be that within our way of talking about consciousness, our language game, there can never be good evidence to support the idea that machines are conscious. But this brings up another question. Whose language game are we talking about? Is it Wittgenstein's language game from the mid-20th century? Is it our current language game in the age of AI? Different communities might have entirely different ways of thinking about and talking about machine consciousness. For example, today, many AI researchers and philosophers have developed entire vocabularies and frameworks for discussing the possibility of machine consciousness. This is suggesting that our language games have evolved and grown since Wittgenstein's time, and they can now accommodate new technological realities. So while Wittgenstein claimed that we can't meaningfully talk about machine consciousness, our very ability to have this conversation with you and me, or me on my cell phone recording this and you watching at some point, might not matter that much in this debate. The same goes for the language games that we play, the ways that different cultures talk about these concepts. What we believe about artificial consciousness might depend a lot on our cultural background. For example, Japanese culture is more open to the idea of conscious machines than Western European cultures. And this makes sense when you think about Japan's cultural traditions like Shinto, which sees spirits in objects and blurs the line between living and non-living things. Japanese anime and manga often feature robots with souls and consciousness, which might make the concept more familiar and acceptable. A lot of indigenous cultures and certain spiritual communities don't just imagine conscious stones, they genuinely believe that stones have awareness. Now, their cultural framework allows for consciousness in objects that Western philosophy considers inanimate. Bernbacher touches on this cultural aspect of Wittgenstein's thinking when he says that machines having consciousness isn't impossible in a fundamental reality sense, but in what philosophers call a transcendental sense, meaning that it depends on the language game and the cultural framework that we're using. What makes this whole discussion even more interesting is that when Wittgenstein was debating Bernbacher, he didn't actually use the word consciousness in referring to Bernbacher's passages. Wittgenstein used the term human soul. Now, this choice of words reveals something important about his perspective. We didn't know what it would look like. I think we were thinking that it would be more hardwired, a sort of electronic brain. What we're finding is that the artificial intelligence we have now is more like a simulated brain. A neuron isn't a physical neuron made out of silicon and metal and rare earth elements. It's a computer simulation of a neuron. And we just simulate millions of these neurons and we can run them through level after level, and then we can simulate the behavior of a mind. So we're stepping one level above the physical substrate of computation. He was thinking about consciousness in deeply human and possibly spiritual terms, not just as a technical function of the brain. And this frames the question differently. Can a machine have not just awareness, but something we might call soul? That's a question that moves beyond science into spiritual and philosophical territory, where different cultures are going to have very different answers. As we stand at the crossroads of artificial intelligence and human consciousness, These questions aren't just academic. They strike at the heart of what it means to be aware, to feel, and to exist. Whether consciousness emerges from complex patterns, biological processes, or something more fundamental to reality itself, in seeking to understand if machines can be conscious, we're ultimately exploring the boundaries of our own existence. These silicon mirrors that we've created force us to confront our assumptions. They challenge us to consider whether awareness should shine through vessels different from our own. Whatever the future holds, whether conscious machines remain forever in the realm of science fiction, or one day greet us as travelers in the experience of being, this exploration reminds us of the extraordinary mystery that we carry within ourselves every waking moment, and that's probably the greatest insight of all.